Hi friends, welcome to tonight's broadcast of Delegate 101 presented by the National FFA Organization. Just a couple things before we get started. We're going to use some different functionality tools in this session, and so to participate fully, you'll want to join using a desktop device. If you are on a mobile device, you can still tune into the broadcast and see the slides, as well as hear the audio. You just may not be able to use some of the fancy features that we're going to turn on throughout tonight's broadcast. Your microphones are currently muted, and we'll tell you a little bit more on how we'll unmute you in just a bit. But here's a couple of housekeeping items to get us started. On the top right corner of your screen, you should see two icons, one for participants and one for chat. You want to turn both of those on by clicking them, and you'll know that they're on when they're highlighted in blue, just as you see them on the screen. Go ahead and take a couple seconds to turn those on. Make sure that you can see the participant list as well as the chat room. Right above the chat room, you're going to see a little icon that looks like a hand. Throughout the broadcast, you'll click on this icon to raise your hand and get recognized by myself or Justin, our moderator. Go ahead and find that icon on the right-hand side of your screen just above the chat section and click on it. Let's see how you do with this feature. Good deal. Now go ahead and put your hands down, and I'm going to ask you a question and ask you to raise your hand if the question applies to you. So click that raise hand button one more time to turn that off. And here's the question. Raise your hand if this is your first time serving as a National Convention delegate. Good deal. It looks like for about 46 of you who are joining us tonight, just over 20 are first-time delegates, and we look forward to having you serve your state associations in this capacity. Go ahead and click that button one more time to put your hand back down. You'll use that feature throughout the broadcast to indicate that you have a question. So when we see your hand raised, we'll call on you and then unmute your phone line so that you can ask your question. If you're not comfortable raising your hand and asking your question on air, we do have a separate option, and we'll get to that in just a second. Next to the raise hand button, you should see an icon that looks something like a megaphone, located right about here on the screen, right next to the raise hand button. If you click on that, it will give you a number of feedback options. The only ones that we'll use in this broadcast are the yes or no options. Those are the green check marks and the red X's. You can go ahead and practice using those by answering this question. Did you attend the 2017 State President's Conference where the delegate process was kicked off? Again, click on the megaphone and then select the green check for yes or the red X for no. All right, thanks so much. For those of you who are not at State President's Conference, don't worry. The purpose of tonight's broadcast is to fill you in on everything you need to know as a delegate. So by no means will you be behind everyone else by the time we wrap up tonight's session. Here's a couple more housekeeping things. You now see the chat room feature towards the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. If you're not comfortable asking questions on air, you can use the chat room to ask questions. Justin, our moderator, will be able to keep an eye on the chat room tonight, and any questions that you ask in that feature, he'll ask us on air, and I'll answer them so that everybody can hear your question and the answer. Now, it's pretty important that when you use the chat room tonight, you click on that drop-down box and select all participants. That way we can ensure that Justin sees your question. So go ahead and change that to all participants now. And then you'll be ready to go for the rest of the session. One more housekeeping thing tonight. We'll get to that in just a second. Sorry about that. So first of all, welcome to Delegate 101. My name is Shane Jakes. I'm an education specialist with the National FFA Organization, and I'll be your presenter for this session. When I'm not focused on convention, I manage the curriculum and facilitators of the organization's state officer programs. I'm a former state FFA officer and National Convention delegate from Rhode Island. I'd like to introduce you to my colleague, Justin.
Hi, friends. I'm Justin Davis, and I'll be moderating the chat room for tonight's session. I serve as a program manager here at the National FFA Organization, and I work alongside Shane and our colleague, Eric Nelson, managing logistics for state officer programs. I grew up in the state of Kentucky, where I served as a state FFA officer and a national convention delegate. So on behalf of the rest of our colleagues and the national officer team, we are excited to welcome each of you to Indianapolis in just a few short weeks for the 90th National FFA Convention and Expo.
Thanks, Justin. Now that you've heard a little bit about us, why don't you tell us where you're from? Up on the upper left-hand corner of your screen, you're going to see a blue icon that looks just like a little highlighter. Click on that, and right below that, you'll see a pointer icon. That will enable you to use the pointer feature, where you can then click on the map to indicate where you call home. For example, Justin and I tonight are joining you from Indianapolis, Indiana. Good deal. It looks like we've got folks joining us from coast to coast tonight. We're excited to have you with us, and we want to remind you that if at any point during this session you do need to step off, we are recording this broadcast. Now with that, if you are interested in asking us a question, but you don't want your voice recorded for the archived broadcast, you want to make sure that you use the chat feature to ask your question. Because if we unmute your phone lines, your voice will be recorded and it will be available for playback later on. And so make that decision on your own. I think this brings us to the end of our housekeeping thing, so let's go ahead and get started. The National FFA Delegate Process is supported by 4 corporate partners: BASF, Elanco Animal Health, Beck's Hybrids, and Wrangler. We'd like to thank our sponsors for their support of the National FFA Delegate Process, as well as other FFA programs and initiatives. While I hope this session is helpful to you, the delegate process is better described in the official delegate handbook. So that we can make the most out of our time together tonight, the information that's being shared has been condensed. Throughout the presentation, you may see an icon that looks like the cover of the handbook as shown on your screen. When you see this icon, it means that more information is listed in the handbook, which you can find online at ffa.org/delegates. When using the icon, we'll be sure to note the section of the handbook that you should reference for more information. Let's begin things by exploring your job as a National FFA Delegate. Your job as a delegate to the National FFA Convention and Expo is representing the interests of FFA members within your state while working to forward the progress of the entire National FFA organization. So while absolutely you were chosen by individuals in your state, be them members or state staff, to serve in this capacity, it's important to keep in mind that there are over 650,000 FFA members across 52 state associations, and the decisions that you make will impact each and every one of them, including folks who are not yet wearing the blue jacket. And so while we ask you to bring the perspective of your state associations and the members and stakeholders that you serve, by all means, you want to keep the entire organization's future in mind as you make decisions. Let's think about who makes up the delegate body. Article 12, Section B of the National FFA Constitution states that at the National Convention, an official delegate assembly limited to 475 delegates will convene. That body is split up into 2 different groups. There are 104 leadership delegates. This is comprised of 2 delegates per state association who met this summer at the State President's Conference to kick off the process. These folks are responsible for navigating and coordinating the committee work that happens in just a few weeks at convention. Joining them on each of the 6 committees are 371 committee delegates. This number varies by association, which we'll get into in just a little bit, and these individuals are responsible for making recommendations to the organization. Items to be considered by delegates include 3 constitutional amendments to the National FFA Constitution and Bylaws, 6 special committees, each formed at State President's Conference, that will make recommendations to be considered by the delegate body, and convention delegates are also responsible for approving American degree candidates, the Auditing Committee report, the Program of Activities Committee report, and for setting national FFA dues. Delegates are also responsible for creating an atmosphere of excitement in the convention arena. To help you do this, we give you the best seats in the House. But as a delegate, you have to work hard in order to play hard. Let's dive into each of these items of business. Before we do that, though, let's take an opportunity to open up that chat room and ask any questions to this point. Justin, let's go ahead and pause here for about 30 seconds and take any questions that come in via chat or using the raise hand feature. If you are entering a question, continue doing so. Justin's going to be monitoring that chat room throughout the broadcast, and he'll keep an eye on it and let us know when some stuff comes in. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and dive into these amendments to the Constitution and bylaws. The first item to be considered are 3 different proposed amendments to the Constitution. Per Article 17 of the National FFA Constitution, the National FFA Advisor is to submit all constitutional amendments to state associations by March 1. That provision has been met, and Dr. Brown's memo to state associations can be found at ffa.org/delegates. You'll also receive a copy of that memo when you arrive in Indianapolis here in just a few weeks. As we mentioned, there are 3 proposals. We're going to take a high-level look at each of them, knowing that you can read much more about them in Dr. Brown's memo. We'll start with Amendment Proposal A. This was submitted by the National FFA Board of Directors and the 2015-16 National FFA Officers. That was Taylor McNeil and her National Officer team. The amendment would remove the collegiate FFA membership type, and the motion will amend the Constitution by striking all of Article 3, Section D from the Constitution, modifying Article 5, Section A of the Constitution, modifying Article 5, Section C of the Constitution, striking all of Article 5, Section D from the Constitution, and modifying Article 8, Section E of the Constitution. The amendment removes the constitutional form of membership. For exact changes and rationale, please see Dr. Brown's memo, again located at ffa.org/delegates. Please also refer to the FAQ, which has been prepared for this amendment. Again, you will receive a hard copy of this proposal and the FAQ upon your arrival to Indianapolis. The second amendment proposal, Proposal B, was submitted by the National FFA Board of Directors and the 2016-17 National FFA Officers. This is the current National Officer team. The amendment would change the National FFA Organization's membership year. The motion will amend the Constitution by changing the organization's membership year, as referenced in Article 15, Section B, by striking September 1 to August 31 and inserting August 31 to July 31. Again, for exact changes and rationale, you can see Dr. Brown's memo online, and you will receive a copy of this amendment proposal upon arrival in Indy. Let's take a look at our last proposal, Proposal C. This was submitted by the National FFA Board of Directors and the 2016-17 National FFA Officers. Again, this is the current National Officer team. The amendment would add the program affiliation option fee to the Constitution and bylaws. The motion will amend the Constitution by adding the words program affiliation fee to the National FFA Constitution and its bylaws in all places where dues are referenced. As you've probably figured out, exact changes and rationale are available online at ffa.org/delegates, and yes, you will receive a hard copy of this proposal upon your arrival to convention in just a few weeks. Before we jump into the 6 committees being convened at this year's National FFA Convention and Expo, let's answer any questions that exist on those 3 constitutional amendment proposals. Again, you can use the chat feature, or you can raise your hand to get recognized. We'll unmute your phone line and ask you on air. Go ahead and take 30 seconds to enter any questions. We'll pause right here.
Shane, it looks like we do have one question. This question comes from Matthew. The question is, how many collegiate chapters are there in the nation?
Great question. So Matthew, there are a couple places that you can find that information. One is in the official memo that Dr. Brown put out. In the rationale, it totals the number of collegiate members and I believe the number of collegiate chapters. We're actually working right now to get you an answer to that question, and we'll make sure that we get that answered by the end of tonight's broadcast. And so be on the lookout, stand by, we'll get you an answer for that one here in just a bit. Justin, any other questions coming in that chat feature at this point?
At this point, oh, just kidding. One more question came in right as I was about to say no. So thanks for that question. It comes from Ashley. The question is, what are some ways that we can gather the opinions of others in our state?
Great question. So yes, that's your responsibility as a delegate, and we suggest that you work with your state FFA staff first and foremost to gather those opinions. They may have already done that work for you and have that information ready for you to bring forward at National Convention. If not, really have conversations among your local members. And so as you interact with FFA members in your state, either in your home chapter or other chapters throughout the state, by all means, ask their thoughts on some of these, not only the proposed amendments, but also on the 6 committee topics as well. You can find a lot of background information on those committees up front, and so if you're not familiar with those, then it's definitely something that you can dig into a little bit before you start asking those questions. I'd also encourage you to talk to more than just members. It's really easy to talk to folks our own age, but keep in mind that there are other folks who are impacted by the work of the organization. And so have those same conversations with ag teachers, have them with your state staff, maybe visit with alumni and other supporters in your local communities and get their take on these topics. It's really important that we represent not only just our members, but our stakeholders as well.
Great. Thanks for that, Shane. At this point, that's all the questions that we have coming through. I will go ahead and remind those listening that if you do have a question at any time during tonight's webinar, feel free to use the chat feature or that hand raise feature that we have, and we'll be glad to answer those questions.
Justin, I actually did get a question sent just to me from Austin, and he wants to know if collegiate membership counts to our overall national membership, and the answer is yes, it does. In that regard, Dr. Brown's memo will point out how that will change a little bit, because we're not going to suddenly no longer recognize these students who are active members in collegiate chapters. They'll move to a different membership type, and you can learn more about that in Dr. Brown's memo. And so we won't spend too much time getting into that tonight. Dr. Brown's done a great job of outlining a lot of the conversation that has gone into that. There's a great FAQ document on that First Amendment proposal that will tell you a little bit more about removing that collegiate membership type. And so I would encourage everyone, not just Austin, to dig into that just a little bit. With that, it's probably also a great reminder that if I'm going to try and not keep an eye on the chat room feature tonight, just because from our side of the coin, we've got a lot of things moving on screen for us as presenters, and so Justin's going to be moderating the chat. And so to make sure that he sees your question and that we don't skip over it, go ahead and in that chat room drop down where it says send to, be sure that you've clicked on all participants, and so that it will get to both Justin and I, and so that if he does miss something, we can both see it. I do have a question, I think, was it Matthew? Matthew, who asked the question on collegiate membership and the number of collegiate chapters nationwide. Currently, there are 55 active collegiate FFA chapters across the country. And again, Dr. Brown's memo does a great job outlining how their role will change as we look at the potential of removing this membership type. So Matthew, there's the answer to your question. And again, I think there's plenty more information that you can find at ffa.org/delegates. Justin, do we have any other questions on the 3 amendment proposals?
Shane, at this time, we do not have questions, so I believe at this point we're free to move forward. But again, if you do have questions, feel free to send those our way. We'll be glad to answer those.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So let's talk about delegate committees. We know that there are 3 constitutional amendments being considered, but that's not the only work that you'll be tasked with considering as we move into our work in just a few weeks. There are 6 committees that have been created by the National FFA Officer Team. They were created this past summer in July at the State President's Conference, and these are what we call special committees, meaning that they change every year. There are a couple of standing committees that are consistent from year to year, and we'll talk about those in just a bit, but these are 6 committees that have been created specifically for the 90th National FFA Convention and Expo, and I'd like to tell you a little bit more about them. The first committee is the Committee for the Nature and Structure of Delegate Work. The committee will reevaluate the purpose of the National FFA Delegate Process, determine the most effective delegate structure, including official delegate allocation, and will establish the structure of committees. This committee is chaired by Tess Seibel of Virginia. Our second committee is the Committee for an Agricultural Education Career Development Event, and it will focus and determine It will examine and determine the relevance of an agricultural education CDE. If effective, the committee will recommend potential components of the CDE. The chair for this committee is Weston Adams from Utah. Our third committee is the Committee for Effective Communication with Members, which will evaluate the current strategy of communication between the National FFA Organization and its members, including but not limited to written publications, digital communications and social media. The committee will also explore new ways to communicate resources such as My Journey and Ag Explorer to members. The chairperson for this committee is Luke O'Leary from California. Our fourth committee is the Committee for Accommodating Students with Special Needs. Here, delegates will evaluate the organization's role in accommodating students with special needs by exploring the creation of content for teachers and advisors and the evaluation of resources for students with special needs at all levels of the organization. This committee is chaired by Liddy Vinton of Nebraska. Our fifth committee is the Committee for the Inclusion of Unpaid Supervised Agricultural Experience Programs. The committee will evaluate the requirements of the chapter, state, and American degrees. The committee will create alternative methods to quantify skill development and professional growth obtained through unpaid SAEs. The committee will identify limitations that students with unpaid SAE programs face elsewhere in the organization and propose solutions. This committee is chaired by Mr. Ryan Matthews of Ohio. The Committee for Chapter Member Programs and Opportunities is our final committee. The committee will identify the needs of chapter members in the area of leadership, agriculture, and career success. They will evaluate career opportunities for members at the chapter level and offer proposed solutions. The committee chair for committee number 6 is Ridge Eubanks from Oklahoma. How are these committees created? As I mentioned, each year, state associations, National FFA staff, and the National FFA Board of Directors submit proposals to the state officers who attend the annual State President's Conference. SPC attendees, consisting of the state president plus 1 additional officer per state, review the proposals and prioritize them according to importance to the National FFA organization. The results of the prioritization are then tallied by adult volunteers known as delegate coordinators. The results of this ranking are then presented to the National FFA officer team. National officers can only see numerical results. They cannot see how individual states prioritize the proposals. The officers, while using the perspective of their travels, as well as those prioritization results, will identify 6 issues and establish committees to convene at the National FFA Convention and Expo to consider these issues. The National Officer Team is also responsible for creating a purpose statement for each of the 6 committees to assist in guiding their work. Those purpose statements are what I just read to you and what you saw on the screen. As we mentioned, there are 6 committees, and so you should and have been assigned to one of these committees. Your pointer feature is now active, so go ahead and point to the committee that you are a member of. If you're not sure but you'd like to learn more, go ahead and click on that box at the bottom and we'll tell you all about it. Good deal. We love to see representation from all 6 of our committees, and it looks like everyone is aware of their committee assignments. If you have a fellow delegate who's not sure what committee they're on, they can find that information at ffa.org/delegates, or if there's somebody who just really likes surprises, they can wait until they arrive in Indianapolis and we'll be glad to tell them at that point. I'm going to go ahead and turn those pointers off, and we'll continue moving on through the presentation. You may be wondering how many folks sit on each committee. On average, committees have approximately 80 committee members, whose job is to pass the final committee recommendation. That group of 80 is broken up into two subgroups. There are approximately 17 leadership delegates who joined us at State President's Conference and were assigned to the committee by lottery. Their responsibility is operating each committee, and we break those leadership delegates down into a number of roles. Every committee will have one committee chair, two committee vice chairs, two committee secretaries, two committee sentinels, and up to 10 discussion group leaders. Now, aside from those 17 individuals, every committee also has approximately 63 committee delegates. These individuals were assigned to committees by state staff in September. And if you're a committee delegate, your responsibility is developing the final committee recommendation. And so leadership delegates run the committee delegates develop that official recommendation, and then the committee works together to pass the recommendation within committee before it goes to a vote before the entire delegate body of 475. You can learn more about the leadership roles that exist within a committee in Section 12 of the official delegate handbook. Let's go ahead and pause here for any questions. Again, use that chat feature or raise your hand. Again, if you've got any questions, you can use that chat room throughout the presentation tonight. But let's move along. Let's take a look at what some of the work that's already happened looks like. At SPC, those 6 committees were formed, and they met to learn their purpose as well as any background information on their issue. Committee leadership determined that information was needed from both state associations and National FFA staff in order to meet their purpose, so they posed questions to both the states and to our team here in Indianapolis. Those committee leadership positions were also filled. And so as you heard me earlier share with you the names of committee chairs, we also have identified who our vice chairs, secretaries, sentinels, and discussion group leaders are. With all that work having transpired, you may be wondering, what should you be doing right now? First and foremost, you should learn more about your committee's purpose and obtain any background information from committee leadership. These documents are available at ffa.org/delegates. You will need to log in to ffa.org in order to access these documents, but you'll find a committee overview document that again shares those purpose statements as well as the name of your committee chair and your committee adult coordinator. You'll also find research findings from each of the committees. These research findings come from National FFA staff and are posted online. And so these are the questions that were posed to our team. Our staff, Justin and I's colleagues, have gone ahead and provided responses, and you can find those responses online. You'll receive a copy of them, a hard copy of them, upon your arrival to Indianapolis. For the questions that were posed to states, your leadership delegates should be working to circulate those questions around to each of the state associations. And so it's very likely that other leadership delegates, the heads of your state delegation, or your state FFA staff have received those questions, and you'll be answering them on site at National Convention. Excuse me. You'll also have conversation around your committee's purpose with FFA stakeholders in your state. And so just as someone asked earlier, we want to be sure that we're gaining the perspective of those whom we represent. It's important to keep in mind that our job is to share the perspective of those we represent and not our own personal opinions and perspectives. Finally, you'll work with state staff to prepare any testimony that reflects the position of your stakeholders. And don't worry, we're going to talk about testimony in just a few minutes. Between now and your arrival in Indianapolis, you should regularly check ffa.org/delegates for any updates. You're going to see lots of resources online, not only for this year's delegate process, but delegate processes back to 2013. Don't worry about printing anything off and bringing it with you. All the pertinent information that's attending online, that is posted online, you'll receive when you attend the National Convention and Expo. I did get a question, Justin, that I'm going to stop right here and answer. David asked if we weren't attending SPC, we're a committee delegate, and yes, that's the case. If you're not a leadership delegate who attended SPC, then you're a committee delegate. And so your responsibility is to do the heavy lifting in drafting that committee report. You are the chief representatives of your committee. And so while your leadership delegates can fill that role as well, their focus is split into two. They have to share perspective of their state while also running the committee. If you're a committee delegate, you have one focus, one objective, and that is to bring perspective of FFA members in your state while working to forward the entire organization. And so we've had delegates in the past that have kind of been discouraged because they haven't come to SPC. And while I'll apologize in advance to the SPC participants, I think committee delegates probably move the needle the most throughout the delegate process because they don't have to focus their attention on two very different areas at one time. And so if you're thinking that you're coming into the game late, you're not. You're actually probably the most pivotal players in the delegate process. Again, sorry to those of you who came to SPC. We loved having you there, though. Let's go ahead and move on into delegate work at convention. Before we do that, though, I think this is probably, Justin, another great time to put a pause in things and ask for any questions that can be answered around the role of committee members, the work that has happened so far, or what you should be doing here in the coming days prior to joining us in Indianapolis. So go ahead, raise your hand, use that chat feature, and Justin, let's remind them again where they should be directing their chats to in that drop-down.
Absolutely. So just as a reminder, let's remember that if we do have a question in the chat feature, let's click on that Send To drop-down box and make sure that all participants is selected. At this point, I will actually go ahead and send another quick reminder via the chat feature. So if you can see that, there are the instructions on how to post a question via the chat feature.
So we'll pause here and let some questions come in, and then we'll get into what's going to happen at National Convention. Next, I see that you're raising your hand. Give me just a second, and I'll go ahead and unmute your phone line. Nope. Okay, your hand went down. Max, I think you typed it into the chat feature too. So Justin, what did Max ask?
Yeah, so the question that Max asked was, what do you feel are effective questions to ask members regarding the importance of their opinion?
Great question, Max. I think, first of all, that varies a little bit from committee to committee based on what the committee's purpose is. And so you really want to understand that purpose statement. What I really appreciate about the work that the National Officer team did this year in writing those purpose statements is they outlined some different talking points or conversation topics that can happen on each committee. And so I think find some members that represent each of those areas. And so, for example, I'm thinking back to one of the committees, the Delegate Process Committee, the very first committee. There's a number of sub-areas in there. They want to talk about the structure of committees. They want to talk about the intent of the process. They want to talk about allocation. Every one of your states has had folks that have served as delegates in years past. And sometimes we think that because they're maybe out of that delegate role, they're no longer wearing that blue jacket, we tend to forget to ask those folks their opinion, but in reality, they've got the most perspective because their FFA career has been the fullest. And so if you're on committee number one, you might talk to some delegates who have participated in the process and get them to just ask some open-ended questions and get them to talk about each of those subtopics. If we're looking at committee number 6, where we're focusing in on chapter member opportunities and different programs that can support chapter members, obviously we want to talk to chapter members. Talk to some folks who went to Washington Leadership Conference. Talk to folks who have participated in 212-360 or have come to National Convention and participated in student workshops. Also, talk to folks who haven't done that. figure out what those roadblocks and barriers have been, or maybe they haven't participated in some of those programs. Again, we're trying to get a really well-rounded perspective, so it's really easy to talk to the folks that we know best, or maybe those whose FFA career, if you will, looks a lot like ours. But chances are, if their FFA career looks like ours, we already know what their perspective is, right? And so instead, focus in on some of the FFA members in your local area that you might not typically have interacted with and get their thoughts as well. That's a great question.
Yeah, and thank you for that answer, Shane. We do have one more question. Taylor wants to know, how much of National Convention will be spent doing delegate work?
Great question. Taylor, is it?
Yes.
Cool. Great question, Taylor. And so the bulk of delegate work will happen on Tuesday and Wednesday of National Convention. Beyond that, business sessions happen on at 2 different intervals on Thursday and on Friday evening if needed. And so there is a delegate schedule online at ffa.org/delegates. And as we get into these next couple of slides, everything that we talk about falls on that delegate schedule. And so you'll be able to see when these different activities and experiences happen. We know that some delegates have different responsibilities, and so some of you might be competing in CDEs, you may be proficiency finalists, you may be a state flag bearer or working in the Hall of States, and so we know that you have different obligations that sometimes might conflict with delegate work. It's important that you communicate that to 2 different individuals. One, you want to be sure that your state staff knows what else is on your calendar so that they know where you are at all times. And secondly, if you do need to step out of the committee room to go handle another obligation, just let your committee coordinator, your adult coordinator, know that that's happening so that if for any reason we're looking for you, they know that you're off doing something else. And so be sure to just communicate that if you have some schedule conflicts.
Absolutely. Thanks, Shane. And one more question did come in. That question is from Austin, and he asked, is it okay to ask members their opinions through social media, for example, chapter or district officer chats?
Yeah, great question, Austin. I think the best person to answer that question is probably your state staff. And so chances are your state FFA staff has guidelines on how to communicate with members and what's appropriate and what's maybe inappropriate. And so I would say that question is better directed to the folks who are managing your delegation at convention, and just make sure that you're complying with their guidelines.
Great. Thank you for that, Shane. At this time, that's all the questions that we have. Again, if you do have questions, feel free to ask those anytime, and we will be happy to address those.
Good deal. Thanks, Justin. Let's dive into delegate work at convention. And so the action starts on Tuesday morning with a training session for all delegates. Here, leadership delegates will convene to finish any final preparation to begin their committee work, and committee delegates will receive training to understand the process and be prepared to participate. From then, we head on to the convention kickoff lunch, where we'll join not only our fellow delegates, but other convention attendees, including the local organizing committee who helps us put on convention, and there we'll hear from some folks who are meant to welcome us here to Indianapolis. Once that kickoff lunch is ended, we'll come back into our initial committee meetings. And here, this is where we set up committee expectations and examine the role of each delegate. As delegates, you'll then meet in small groups to begin discussing your delegate research findings. And so this is not only the information that comes from us here at National FFA, but also comes from each of your state associations. From there, we move into delegate hearings that afternoon. Delegate hearings are a little bit different. Only delegates may testify in the hearings, and we need to make sure that testimony always represents the state opinion rather than the opinion of the particular delegate. Testimony is always delivered in written form, but it also has the option of being delivered orally. For every committee, a maximum of 15 5-minute time slots will exist for oral testimony. States may only deliver oral testimony once per committee. And so I'm from the state of Rhode Island. If I were a Rhode Island delegate this year and I am accepted to give oral testimony on the committee for inclusion of unpaid SAE programs, and a fellow delegate from Rhode Island also tries to give oral testimony on that committee, only one of us can give that oral testimony to that committee. Now, my fellow delegate may go and provide oral testimony on another committee, and I can as well. However, for each committee, it's 1 bit of oral testimony per state association. And the reason for that is if you're truly representing the perspective of those in your state, then your testimony is going to be likely the same. And so we want to give equal time to as many state associations as we can. Those 15 5-minute time slots are awarded via a lottery, and a schedule of testimony will be posted outside of each committee room. We will do our very best on our end that if you are giving testimony in more than one committee, that we space that out a bit so that you don't have to be in 2 places at once. Again, everyone will who submits testimony will do so in written form. There's a document that you can download at ffa.org/delegates. Your state staff may have already downloaded it for you, and so definitely work with them before you start submitting any testimony. But you'll submit it, everyone will submit it in writing, and everyone will get a copy of all written testimony submitted. On that form, you have the option to apply for oral testimony. It is not required. And in fact, if you are going to take advantage of that option, we really encourage you to use that time productively by talking about more than what information is already provided on the form. Everyone can read that form, and so any oral testimony should go above and beyond the information already provided in writing. Now, those 5-minute time slots are broken down. It's 3 minutes for testimony, followed by 2 minutes for questions. And so at the end of the 3 minutes, the committee sentinels will indicate that your time has expired, and then we'll begin 2 minutes of questions. Again, at the end of 2 minutes, the sentinels will indicate that that time has expired, and your testimony will be completed. We'll post those schedules for oral testimony no later than 1:30 p.m. on Tuesday, so that everyone can understand where they need to be throughout the rooms. And all written testimony will be provided at the start of delegate hearings. And so as the speakers are speaking, you will have a copy of their testimony form to be able to follow along so that you don't have to worry about capturing notes. If you have any questions about delegate testimony, we've outlined this really well in the official delegate handbook. Just check out section 16. Although, Justin, I think history tells us that this is a place where folks tend to have a lot of questions, and so why don't we go ahead and pause here for about 30 seconds and take those questions either by raising your hand or sending a chat message to all participants.
Shane, it looks like we do have one question. This question comes from Ashley. The question is, if 2 delegates from the same state wish to speak about the same committee, how is it decided who speaks?
Great question, Ashley. That's actually done by us in the lottery process. And so I can tell you a little bit about how that works. That testimony is collected right on up through 9 a.m. on Tuesday morning. It's submitted to us. And then at 9:01 a.m., what we do is we take all those testimony forms and we separate them out by committee. So we make 6 different piles, 1 per committee. We then go through those piles and separate those that are written testimony only from those who are applying for oral testimony. We then have a sign-up sheet that we just randomly grab from the oral testimony pile at random and plug in those time slots. So if 2 of you have submitted testimony, it's literally a matter of which one we grab first. Then the person whose application for oral testimony is not accepted, they go back into the written testimony pile so that we can all at least see what that individual wrote. Great question, and if that did not completely answer it, go ahead and type a note to Justin and let's ask some follow-up. Justin, any other questions on delegate hearings or oral and written testimony?
Shane, at this point, there are no more questions that I see coming through on my end. However, we'll take a few more seconds and see if any more come through before we move on. So remember, type those questions down there in the chat box, or you can raise your hand and you could ask your question verbally that way.
Again, we'll give you some time to continue typing. If you haven't quite finished your question, keep working on it. We're going to move ahead, but we can certainly circle back. Once we get through delegate hearings, we then bust into committee meetings. And so this is where you'll sit and again convene in small groups to review any of the testimony that you heard and read. You'll also hear from subject matter experts who have been asked to testify before your committee. In the case of nearly every committee, these are the national staff individuals, our colleagues here in Indianapolis, who have responded to those questions. And they'll be with you for about 15 minutes. I want to offer a little bit of a disclaimer here. Our individuals, our colleagues will stay with you as long as they possibly can, but at the same time, we also have different areas of convention that they're responsible for. And so it'll be really important to use their time effectively, that you're asking the right questions to them and that you've prepared those questions ahead of time. We don't want to get in a situation where we're asking them their particular opinion on the issue. That's not their role in the process. It's more questions of fact. And so you want to ask them questions about policy, about procedure, maybe about strategy and where some of these programs, products, and services are heading in the future, and maybe some questions that you found yourself wondering after you've read their research responses. And so if you need clarification on something, that's a great thing to ask them. However, we do want this to be a student-directed process. And so we want to make sure that we're not asking them for their perspective, as this is they have perspectives, trust us. That we all have perspectives here at National FFA. However, the purpose of this process is to get the student perspective, and that comes best through each of you as delegates. From there, we'll engage in some more productive discussion where our job is to synthesize all the different perspectives and opinions and thoughts that we've heard and try and separate them out and capture some main themes and concepts that we'll review later. And so this will wrap up the bulk of our afternoon of delegate work on Tuesday. Once we're done with that, there's a dinner for delegates and state FFA officers hosted by our corporate partners. And following that, Tuesday evening, there is a career success panel and networking event with some of the leading companies in agriculture. We highly encourage your participation at this event. It's a great way to make connections for future internships and employment opportunities. This wraps up our delegate work on Tuesday. From there, we head into delegate work bright and early Wednesday morning, and we start things off with public hearings. During public hearings, anyone, be them students, teachers, or state staff, or other individuals, can sign up to testify on any committee. No advance copy of testimony is needed, and so all testimony is oral. No written testimony will be accepted or distributed. There are 10 5-minute time slots per committee. Those time slots will be posted outside of each committee room by 7 a.m. on Wednesday morning, and they're filled first come, first serve. And so you'll want to get down to the convention center just after 7 a.m. on Wednesday morning if you intend to speak during public hearings. For those individuals who may have applied for oral testimony on Tuesday but were not accepted, if you feel like your point has not been made, you are eligible to sign up for these public hearings. And so delegates may also sign up for public hearings as well. Again, these spots are filled first come, first serve, and by 8 a.m. we close the sign up. And so at that point, we provide a copy of that schedule to leadership delegates so that they can welcome those individuals giving testimony and start hearing those different perspectives. What questions are there on public hearings? Let's pause here before we get any deeper. If you do have any questions on public hearings, you can check out Section 16 of the official delegate handbook, where it outlines all the procedures and processes for both delegates and public hearings. Let's see what else happens on Wednesday. There are final committee meetings where we revisit any previously captured concepts and evaluate input from public hearings. We'll also draft and approve our committee recommendations and prepare those recommendations for presentation at the delegate business session. A copy of what committee recommendations will look like can be found in Section 17 of the official delegate handbook, and you'll also receive a copy of that upon your arrival to Indianapolis. After committee work ends and your committee report is finalized, we'll celebrate our work at the delegate luncheon, and then you're free to enjoy the rest of your day at convention by exploring the National FFA Expo, the FFA Megastore, or any other functions that your state staff have planned for you. And so this wraps up our committee work at convention. There is one item of note, and we'll announce this several times throughout convention, that on Wednesday afternoon, one representative from every state should stop by delegate headquarters to pick up a copy of the final recommendations so that every delegate in your state delegation has a hard copy of that for the business sessions so that they can follow along as those recommendations are presented. And so, again, we'll announce this throughout the process. In most cases, this will likely be your state president or the head of your state delegation. Really, it can be any delegate for that matter. So state presidents and delegation heads, if you're busy, you can certainly assign that work out to somebody else. Justin, any questions on what happens as we wrap up committee work?
Shane, actually, let's circle back real quick to public testimony. This question comes from Dawson, wanting to know, when you testify, do you testify just in front of a committee or in front of the entire delegate body?
Great question, Dawson. At this point, you're testifying just into individual committees. And so you would sign up for the committee that you want to testify to, and you would provide that testimony just to the approximately 80 individuals who are part of those meetings. We did get a question. We had Delegate 101 last night, and somebody asked the question, am I allowed to testify on my own committee, or is it just other committees? You can testify on any committee that you want to, and we certainly encourage that if nothing else, you do provide written testimony for each committee. However, again, you want to work with your state staff to develop that because it's supposed to represent your state's opinion, and you are not a lone representative of your state. But you can testify to each and every committee if you so choose to, and if that is the direction that your state staff gives you. Great question. I hope that answered it. If not, go ahead and ask a follow-up of Justin, and we'll make sure that we work through that. Justin, any other questions at this point before we talk about what happens Thursday and beyond?
Shane, at this point, I have no more questions. If you are working on typing a question, go ahead and finish that up and feel free to send it, and we'll get to that as they pop up.
Good deal. So let's talk about the delegate business sessions, what happens during them, and what happens after them. Delegate business sessions happen on Thursday of convention. They operate under the same order of business as a regular meeting. The first thing that we'll do is read and approve the 2016 convention minutes. We'll then approve the Auditing and Program of Activities Committee reports. These two committees are standing committees that are made up of the National FFA officer team as a part of their duties of office. So they will formally present some recommendations to you. You'll actually get a copy of these recommendations on Wednesday afternoon when you pick up your committee recommendations. But the officers will put their reports out to you, and you'll vote to approve them or reject them as the case may be. Delegates will then vote on committee recommendations and constitutional amendments. And so we'll go through the committees one by one, and then go through the constitutional amendments one by one. The last two items of business are ceremonial. They're approving the candidates of for the American FFA degree and setting dues for the following membership year. That dues recommendation is posted online at ffa.org/delegates, and you'll get a hard copy of it when you arrive to convention. The delegate business sessions split over two different times. The first business session will happen on Thursday morning after General Session 1C, and the second business session will happen Thursday evening after General Session 3. We'll get through as much work as we possibly can in the first business session, but at 12:30 p.m., so just after noon, we'll put that session in recess. And so if we have not completed all the work, actually if we have not gotten to the point where we pass the committee recommendations, all of that will move to Thursday evening. If we get to a point where Thursday morning we do pass all 6 committee recommendations and are ready to move into constitutional amendments, we'll pause where we are and begin with constitutional amendments on Thursday evening. When we look at Thursday evening, we'll have that about 2 hours to conclude the rest of our work. If for one reason or another we don't get to conclude our work on Thursday evening, we'll come back Friday evening after General Session 7 to conclude our delegate business. Now, I can speak from experience that in 10 years of working with the delegate process at National FFA, we've not needed that Friday night session. However, knock on wood, now that I've said that, we'll probably need to go to Friday night, and so I apologize for jinxing you all. But that's our plan of attack for these delegate business sessions. Once we approve all the reports and make our recommendations to the organization, they come back here to 6060 FFA Drive. Those requiring action by the Board of Directors will be brought up at the January Board of Directors meeting, and those that are more operational in nature will be acted upon by the National FFA Organization's Integrated Management Team. A progress report will be given on any recommendations on a regular basis until the recommendation is fully implemented or until we have determined that no action will be taken on a particular recommendation. That does happen from time to time. It's important for you to know that these are recommendations, not directives. And in some cases, recommendations may be made that can conflict with the overall strategy of the organization, or they may conflict with our policy and procedures. So, for example, if one of the committees this year were to say that we're going to move the National FFA Center to Italy, that's probably not going to happen just because it comes with significant cost and it wouldn't make sense to serve our members. And so that's maybe a very extreme example of an instance where we may not take action on a specific recommendation. There are others as well, and in any case that we choose not to take action, we'll always post the rationale for that in the recommendation progress report. You can actually check those out for past delegate processes at ffa.org/delegates. The official delegate handbook also has a visual flow chart that kind of guides you through the life of a delegate proposal that you can check out in section 20. Justin, what questions do we have on any of this information?
Yeah, Shane, at this point we do have one more question that came in. That question comes from Austin. The question is, will any of the delegate sessions interfere with general convention sessions?
Great question, Austin. No, none of the delegate sessions will interfere with general sessions. They all happen immediately following a general session, and I'm glad that you asked that because it brings up 2 points that I discussed last night that I have not mentioned tonight. And the first is that at the end of a general session, the convention arena empties out. It's important that delegates remain on the delegate floor during that time as the arena empties, because if you leave the arena, you may not be permitted re-entry. And so it's really important that once a general session ends, that you remain on the delegate floor so that not only we can start the session on time, but also so that you get to participate fully in the session. There are some instances, especially during Delegate Business Session 1, where state photos are happening over in the Convention Center. And so if your state delegation needs to leave so that you can be in your state photo, you simply need to come to the Secretary Station and find Victoria Harris or myself, and we'll be at that Secretary Station. Let us know that you're leaving, and we'll make sure that you are allowed re-entry into the arena so that once your photo is done, you can come right back and participate fully in the Delegate Business Session. Great question. Justin, any other questions regarding delegate business sessions or the work that happens after convention?
It looks like right now there are no more questions. If you do have a question, just as a reminder, we can take those 2 different ways. As we've seen tonight, it's pretty popular to type those questions in the chat box, so feel free to do that. Or if you want to ask a question verbally, you can raise your hand and Shane will unmute your phone line so that you can ask that question as well. So take a few more seconds. If you have some questions, go ahead and type those out so we can answer those for you.
Yeah, and while you're capturing those questions, I'll acknowledge that we're coming up here on the top of the hour, and so if you do need to disconnect, no need to let us know. Go ahead and hop off as needed. We don't have too much more information, so if you can stick with us, we'd love for you to do that. However, if you do need to disconnect, this session is being recorded, and we will make a copy of it available to you beginning on Monday morning, and so that you can listen to the session in its entirety or just the portions that you missed. Justin, before we move on, any other questions at this point?
Nope. At this point, we are good to move forward. Again, if you have those questions, continue sending those, and I will document those so that Shane can answer them.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about a few other convention items. We do have some security announcements for you. It's the policy of the National FFA Organization and the following convention venues: the Indiana Convention Center, Bankers Life Fieldhouse, Lucas Oil Stadium, and the Indiana State Fairgrounds, that weapons or knives of any type or size are not allowed into the venues. If you do have one of these items on your person, you will not be allowed entry with the item. Items found during security checks for entry will be taken if you choose not to return the item to your vehicle or hotel. Similar procedures found in airports today will be used for used during entry for many events at all convention venues. This may include bag checks and entry through metal detectors or the use of hand wands. Our responsibility as National FFA staff is always to make sure that our convention attendees are safe and secure while they're with us at convention, and so we don't do this to be an inconvenience or a pain. We do this to maintain the safety of all of our participants. Now, with that said, we also recognize that our students are ag kids, and it's not uncommon for them to have a pocket knife on them, but keep in mind there's going to be no farming or ranching during convention, so you probably won't need that knife. And if it's a knife of sentimental value to you, like a pen knife that Grandpa gave you, you'll definitely want to leave it behind in your vehicle or hotel room so that you don't risk the chance of it getting taken and confiscated from you. With that, we really highly recommend that you not leave items of value in your vehicle. In fact, don't leave items that could be perceived to be of value in your vehicle. We know that many of you are taking minivans or passenger vans to convention. They have a lot of windows. There's not really a good place to secure things, but for your own protection and the security of your items, try not to leave any items in your cars or in any vehicles. We certainly don't want an incident happening that would result in you losing those. And so just a quick public service announcement to that end. A couple of other things for you regarding convention. You can always learn more about convention at ffa.org/events, and then click on the Convention and Expo link. In fact, these days, because we're getting so close to convention, there's a link right on FFA.org's homepage that will take you to the convention site. And there you can learn more about these security procedures or other general convention information. In addition to that, we have a really cool mobile app that is available in either the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store. All you need to do to find it is search for National FFA Convention. The app is free, and as a bonus for you, if you're an Apple user, they come with these fun iMessage stickers that you can insert into your messages throughout convention. These are my favorites. I like to pretend that every time I use the Trey Elizondo one, I'm getting a high five from him, and so feel free to use these for all purposes throughout National Convention. They're a lot of fun. That brings us to the end of tonight's broadcast. We certainly thank you for joining. Justin and I, our contact information is up on the screen, so if you have any last-minute questions that you didn't get to answer during the broadcast, or if something pops into your mind later on, feel free to reach out to us via phone or email. We'll certainly have plenty of opportunity throughout the delegate process at convention for you to ask those questions as well. Our delegate coordinators, your committee leadership team, are equipped to answer any questions that you have, and so reach out to Justin or I, or wait until we get on-site at convention, and we'll definitely work through those questions. Thanks again for joining this Delegate 101 session. Be sure to contact us if needed, and otherwise, we'll see you here in Indianapolis in just a few short weeks. Thanks for your time tonight, and take care.